If you do like these tank chats, do please subscribe to the Tank Museum's YouTube channel.
This is the Crossley Armoured Car. Crossley was a Manchester firm, and they built the chassis and of course the engine, all that sort of thing. The armour for the body was built by the Royal Ordnance Factory, so it's a combination really. But the chassis is Crossley's model 2060. It's about a bit light for this sort of work really. It's a 30 hundredweight chassis. It's a little bit light for this one. The actual layout of the vehicle is what they call a 6x4. That means it's a six-wheeler, but driven on the four wheels at the back with the front axle purely for steering. It's an incomprehensible system, but there we are. That's the way they did it in those days. The vehicle's got a 50 horsepower four-cylinder engine in it, and it's cooled. It's actually quite unusual, this. It's cooled by thermo-siphoning. Now, if you haven't come across that before, it means you actually filled the radiator from the top of the cab there. There's a sort of a flap, and you filled that up with cold water. Water then ran down a long tube into the engine, was heated up by the engine, passed through the radiator, then up another long tube until it came to the point where water comes in at the top and cooled down. So it formed a sort of cycle that way and didn't require any pump to move the water around. The water went round by itself. Still needed a radiator, it still needed a fan, but with thermo-siphon cooling you have no pump at all. It's all done by gravity in effect, hot water rising above cold water, that sort of thing. So it's an unusual arrangement, but it's worth noting just as a curiosity relevant to the vehicle. It's got flaps here that are hinged up and down to let cooling air in for the radiator when you can do so, or protect the radiator by folding down from bullets if anyone's so unkind as to fire at it. But that's how the chassis is made. Now the body is made by Royal Ordnance, mainly out of plate about 9mm thick, which was the maximum for an armoured car, but it meant the thing was relatively light, weighed about 6 tons altogether. But the body was built by Royal Ordnance. It has 2 machine guns. They're both water-cooled 303 Vickers. One of them is alongside the driver here in the front of the hull. The other is in the turret. Now the turret is odd. It's actually the turret from a light Mark IIA tank built by Royal Ordnance, and that's why the turret is quite an odd shape. It's rather long at the back, and it's quite odd. If you read most of the books now, they'll tell you it has a Mark III turret on. It doesn't. The Mark III turret had an optional mounting for a 50 caliber machine gun, which you didn't get in this one. You only got a 303. So it's definitely the turret of a light Mark IIA, perched on top of the vehicle and extended at the back to hold the radio. So it's it does stick out at the back rather a lot. It's a queer arrangement, but that's how it was done anyway. So there's the vehicle, the basic thing. They say that there were 5 of them built actually, 5 all exactly the same. They went out to Egypt, and there they found they sank in the sand the minute they were taken away from a hard standing. They didn't like sand at all. The Rolls Royces, which were ordinary four-wheelers, could bounce all over it, but the Crossleys didn't like it. And one of the COs of one of the regiments out there promptly locked these 5 in a shed and refused to use them at all for that reason. They were not really ideal for sand and those sort of conditions, which most of the British equipment was, or at least meant to be. So that's another sort of fly in the ointment, if you like. It meant that they came back to Britain. They were used for a little while before the war in armoured car companies, and during the early part of the war, you'll find odd pictures of them turning up with newly raised regiments that are waiting to get their real vehicles and are managing on the few of these and a few other odds and sods in the meantime, and that's the best pictures you'll ever see of them. But this is it, the Crossley Armoured Car, and quite a poor vehicle really, but an interesting one all the same, especially with things like that thermosiphon cooling arrangement in there, quite unusual.
We are a charity here at the Tank Museum, so if you can support us, please do. Consider joining our Patreon scheme or becoming a member of the Friends. Any donations will go directly towards the Tank Museum and its activities.